Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna.
Hare Krishna, everybody. Welcome to our Japa series. We're going to be talking about leveling up your Japa, and it's going to be a 3-part series. And part 1 we are going to cover, which is today. We're going to cover Japa as the foundation of our spiritual life. We're going to talk about Lord Chaitanya's example, and we're going to talk about the 3 stages of chanting. And in part 2, we're going to be talking about time management and the role of sleep in our Japa practice. And in part 3, we're going to talk about dealing with distractions, and we're going to talk about the mode of goodness and beyond. And today we're going to start with a Japa self-assessment. As you go through each session, 1, 2, and 3, you could do this self-assessment before and after and see if anything changes. So listen to the session, take notes, try to apply some of the things to your Japa and see if anything changes from your self-assessment in the beginning and your self-assessment as you go along studying and applying. So I have a scale from 0 to 10, and you can rate yourself. And it's important to be honest because you can't troubleshoot if you don't know what the trouble is, right? And so first is assessing ourselves and seeing where we're at in our Japa. And it could change from day to day. There's some days that are better than others. But on average, if you were to say on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being Japa is a burden that I do only out of duty. I try to distract myself with other things while I chant. So that's the bottom of the barrel. That's a 0. And then somewhere between 0 and 5, 5 being it's not always a burden. Sometimes I try to pay attention. And then 10 being my taste for Japa knows no limits. I want to chant 24/7. So if you can rate yourself on that scale anywhere between 0 to 10 and just take note of it. And again, be honest with your assessment, because then later on, if you try to apply some of the techniques we talk about, you can see whether or not you're making progress with some difficulties in your chanting. So it's difficult, and this may be difficult to be honest with because our whole movement is based on chant and be happy, right? So sometimes if we chant and we're not happy or we don't like to chant, we may think there's something wrong with us. And at the core, I mean, there may be something wrong with our technique or we may have a misunderstanding, but we may think that there's something corrupt about us, that if I don't like Japa, then there must be something wrong with me. Therefore, I like Japa. I'm just going to say I like it. And I'm going to convince myself that I do. So it's one thing we don't want to do is that if we don't actually like chanting, or it is a burden, or it's somewhere in between, maybe it's average. It's not always a burden. Sometimes I try to pay attention. It may be difficult for us to say that out loud to other devotees. We fear we may be judged. We fear that, again, there's something maybe, there's some corruption in our core that can't be fixed. Maybe we're not suited for this, but to try to convince ourselves we like something that we don't like means that we can't fix the problem. And then we're always trying to just tell ourselves that something is actually good that doesn't feel good to us. And so we don't want to run into that trap of convincing ourselves of something that's not true because it sounds good, rather than trying to discover whether or not it's true so that we can fix it if it's not. So take a moment to do that. You can pause the video, write it down, maybe keep track somewhere, a notepad on your phone, or even a physical notepad. And then again, you can do a beginning and end. You can see as your sessions go on with chanting and with studying, does that average change? Does that score change? And as I mentioned, there's going to be 3 main topics for today. It's going to be Japa as the foundation, Lord Chaitanya's personal example, and the 3 stages of chanting. Okay, so Japa as the foundation of our spiritual life. That's our first topic. So the dictionary definition is that a foundation is an underlying basis or principle. And I even put the Latin here, from Old French and from Latin, which means in the Latin, I'm not going to try to pronounce that. I'm sure I'll do it wrong. But to lay a base for. So japa is the foundation of our spiritual life. It's laying the base for the rest of the spiritual structure that we put on top of it. And so our service to devotees, our service in the temple, our service in the deities, our service to humanity in terms of outreach, it's all built on this foundation of japa. And so if the foundation is not strong, the structure you build on top of it will not be secure, even if the structure itself is strong. So you may be really good at your service. You may even really be good at outreach. You may be good at distributing books. You may be good at, you may have so many skills, and very sincerely also, not just that you see it as a job to do and you've mastered the job, but more like you have a taste even for service, and you have, you want to do it to the best of your ability. You want to build all of that on a strong, sound structure of japa. So we take a vow, right? So our vow, Srila Prabhupada says, this is in a correspondence on June 12, 1976. Prabhupada says, the devotees must all bear in mind that they are promising to follow the 4 regulative principles. That is, no illicit sex life, no intoxication, no gambling, and no meat eating. And also chanting a minimum of 16 rounds of japa daily. This promise is made before the spiritual master, before the deity, the devotees, Vaishnavas, the supersoul, and the fire. Everyone should take very seriously this vow and make steady and sure progress in Krishna consciousness and go back home, back to Godhead in this lifetime. So there's a vow being made. And whenever there's a vow being made, especially Prabhupada emphasizes it's before the deity, the devotees, the fire, the sewer. I mean, he's listing all these people that we take the vow before, including the fire, right? The fire yagya. And so we make this promise. So that must mean, it indicates to us, it should indicate to us that this is a very serious thing. It's meant to be taken seriously, as Prabhupada says. Everyone should take very seriously this vow. And he's saying if you take seriously this vow, you make steady and sure progress in Krishna consciousness and you go back to Godhead in this lifetime. So if we think about that, then we can see that if we do nothing else, at least we follow our vow of chanting our minimum of 16 rounds and following the regulative principles. The regulative principles make it possible to chant, actually, and to do service. And so they're coupled together. So first of all, there's the vow, which shows us how important it is. And then in terms of self-realization, this is in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila, chapter 17, text 21 to 22. In this age of Kali, there is no other means, no other means, no other means for self-realization than chanting the holy name, chanting the holy name, chanting the holy name of Lord Hare. In this age of Kali, the holy name of the Lord, the Hare Krishna maha mantra, is the incarnation of Lord Krishna. Simply by chanting the holy name, one associates with the Lord directly. Anyone who does this is certainly delivered. So this is our means in this age of deliverance and self-realization. And then emphasizing that it's the Yuga Dharma. This is Ancha Lila of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, chapter 20, text 9. This is chapter 20, actually, of the Ancha Lila, is where the Shikshashika prayers are found. In this age of Kali, the process of worshiping Krishna is to perform sacrifice by chanting the holy name of the Lord. One who does so is certainly very intelligent, and he attains shelter at the lotus feet of Krishna. And then also in the Srimad Bhagavatam 12.3.52. Whatever result was obtained in Satya Yuga by meditating on Vishnu, in Treta Yuga by performing sacrifices, and in Dwapara Yuga by serving the Lord's lotus feet, can be obtained in Kali Yuga simply by chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And then japa reconnects us with Krishna. And again, this is Ancha Lila, chapter 20, text 11. Simply by chanting the holy name of Lord Krishna, one can be freed from all undesirable habits. This is the means of awakening all good fortune and initiating the flow of waves of love for Krishna. And text 14, the result of chanting is that one awakens his love for Krishna and tastes transcendental bliss. Ultimately, one attains the association of Krishna and engages in his devotional service as if immersing himself in a great ocean of love. And so we are going to go into this in this session, this part where the verse says, one can be freed from all undesirable habits. So these are anartas. Undesirable habits means anartas. And so to be freed from them, we have to go through anarta nivritti, right? So there's the stages from shraddha to prema, the steps that we take. And anarta nivritti is a very crucial phase for us to go through in order to reconnect with Krishna properly and continue on to prema. And then, of course, we see the results of chanting. These are kind of all the japa is the foundation, and here's why we do it, right? So this is the why. And we often talk about the why in our tradition. We don't always talk about the how, right? So it goes back to that point I was saying before that we see this can add to possibly to our feelings of guilt that, wow, look at here, we know all the reasons why the Maha Mantra is so great, why we need to do it, all the benefits we get from it, and still I'm having trouble. So we don't always talk about the how to recognize what the trouble is and then work to fix it. And so then in the Bhagavatam, it talks about basically how there are no excuses for not chanting. So we can't say we're too fallen to chant. Krishna's got that base covered. There's all these, Krishna knows how the conditioned mind thinks. Actually, he knows how all souls think, but especially conditioned souls in this world. And so he always puts these teachings in to say, I know you're going to think this, so here's my instruction about that. So for example, you may say you're too fallen to chant. So in the Bhagavatam, it's explained, O king, constant chanting of the holy name of the Lord after the ways of the great authorities is the doubtless and fearless way of success for all, including those who are free from all material desires, those who are desirous of all material enjoyment, and also those who are self-satisfied by dint of transcendental knowledge. And of course, this is Shukadeva Goswami speaking to King Parikshit when he's only got 7 days left to live, and he's asking, what's the dharma of man, especially a man who's about to die? And so what's being explained here is that it doesn't matter if you have all material desires, no material desires, or you're satisfied by dint of transcendental knowledge. So someone basically who's liberated, someone who has every single material desire, and someone who has is free from all material desires. And so it doesn't matter what category you're in, you should chant constantly. And so this should give us some encouragement that it's not about how fallen we are. It's more about how sincere we are. Do we want to reconnect with Krishna? If so, here's the process to do so, and no one is too fallen to take up that process. Okay, so we're going to talk next about Lord Chaitanya's personal example. And this is illustrated in his Shikshashika prayers. I talk about this a lot more in depth in my Shikshashika classes, which is also a 3-part series. If you're interested, I'm going to be including the link to that video here. But let's go over some things very briefly. So Lord Chaitanya in his second Shikshashika prayer, this is found in the Chaitanya Charitamrita Anjalila, chapter 20. So in that chapter, he says a prayer, one of the Shikshashika prayers, and in between there is some discussion, either Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami talking about how Lord Chaitanya behaves next, or what his mood was after he recited a verse, or Lord Chaitanya himself uttering some further explanation or prayers of humility. So he says, My Lord, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, in your holy name there is all good fortune for the living entity, and therefore you have many names such as Krishna and Govinda by which you expand yourself. You have invested all your potencies in those names, and there are no hard and fast rules for remembering them. My dear Lord, although you bestow such mercy upon the fallen conditioned souls by liberally teaching your holy names, I am so unfortunate that I commit offenses while chanting the holy name, and therefore I do not achieve attachment for chanting. We have a clue towards the end of this verse about how to troubleshoot, and then we're going to talk about how to fix once we find the trouble. So this is what Lord Chaitanya says, I am so unfortunate that I commit offenses while chanting the holy name, and therefore I do not achieve attachment for chanting. This is Prabhupada's translation in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. There's a translation in the Songs of the Vaishnavacharyas. It's a little different than this one. But we also have Bhaktivinoda Thakur's teachings. And he talks about this word unfortunate. The Sanskrit word is durdaivam. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains that durdaivam, or misfortune, is the committing of offenses. And so this is how Prabhupada is translated. I'm so unfortunate that I commit offenses while chanting the holy name. Okay, so this teaches us to admit when we don't have a taste for chanting, right? So that's the first thing. Lord Chaitanya, obviously we know he has a taste. He is Krishna and Radharani combined, coming to this world in the form of a devotee so that he can teach by his personal example. Well, there's 3 reasons why he comes. That's another class. But he comes to also act as a devotee, and so he's teaching by example. So he teaches us to admit when we don't have a taste for chanting. And so just by his example alone, we know that even if we don't want to tell the entire Vaishnava world that we don't have a taste, we can at least tell ourselves. And perhaps even a friend who's not judgmental, right? A Vaishnava friend that we can trust and who is only interested in our spiritual well-being. And we can go and reveal our mind to them and tell them, look, I'm having trouble. I'm having trouble with my chanting. So first is just to admit when we don't have a taste. We definitely don't want to pretend we have a taste for chanting. If we don't, nothing will ever get fixed. And this is the stakes are very high. We want to go back to God and we want to reconnect with Krishna. And so it doesn't help us or anybody else if we pretend we have a taste if we don't. Or maybe we have a taste sometimes, but not all the times, and we're not sure why. And so first it's the admitting. And that, of course, that's, what do they say? In 12-step program, step 0 is admitting you have a problem. Then you start taking the steps to fix it. Okay, so then it teaches us to troubleshoot the reason we don't have a taste for chanting. So he says, I don't have a taste, and here's why. He figured out because it's the committing of offenses, which again, we know Lord Chaitanya doesn't commit offenses, but he's giving us the example to work from, which is basically the reason why we don't usually have a taste for chanting, if we don't. It's from committing offenses. And then he teaches us one of the most important things. I mean, it's really important first. We can't even get to the third important thing until we do the first one, which is admit that we don't have a taste. He teaches us that we have the power to take remedial action, right? So we may resign ourselves to, I'm one of those fallen souls who doesn't like chanting. I do it because it's a vow. I get it over with as quickly as I can. I just power through and I get on with my day with the things I actually like. And then we could just push it to the back of our mind and just think, well, this is my spiritual life. I'll just do a lot of extra service. I'll be nice to the devotees. I'll serve them. And I may not have a taste for chanting, but at least I'm sincere about my service and I'm sincere about my vow, which is important. It's important to maintain that vow. But take it a step further, get that taste for chanting. So we can take remedial action. It's not a hopeless case. And that may be another reason why people don't want to admit they don't have a taste, because they may, again, feel like they're corrupt to the core, they're hopeless. There's nothing they can do about it because they're often not given the tools. Many times, a devotee may say to us, oh, you don't have a taste. Why not? You know, Krishna's invested all his potencies into the holy names. Why don't you have a taste? Chant and be happy. Prabhupada says we should be happy when we chant, you know. And so there's no real solution. But there's no real solution given, typically. But there is a solution. Okay, so this is going to segue into the 3 stages of chanting, because these 3 stages can show us what the problem is. The 3 stages of chanting are Namaparad, which is offensive chanting, Namabasa, which is what Prabhupada calls almost pure chanting, and Shuddhanam, which is pure chanting. So the first 2 stages, Namaparad and Namabasa, in those stages, our mind wanders away from Krishna by default. And in Shuddhanam chanting, or pure chanting, our mind wanders toward Krishna by default. So this is a really important point to know. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Why it's important to know that your mind wanders from Krishna by default before you reach the stage of pure chanting. Okay, so question for everybody. Which of these 3 stages can you skip? Which one do you think that you can skip? And you can pause the video and think about it for a moment, and think about which one you're at, because we talk about it as being stages, but one of the stages you don't have to be on. You can skip that one. So the stage you can skip is Namaparad. This is offensive chanting. You can actually go straight to Namabasa chanting and skip the stage of Namaparad. So it's not like, okay, I'm on the Namaparad stage, it's offensive chanting, I'll just hover around here for a while until I automatically go to the next stage. It's just a matter of time. It's not the case. It's not a matter of time. Between Namabasa and Shuddhanam, it is a matter of time. But for Namaparad, we can just chuck it. We can skip it altogether. Okay, so on this stage, and here's why. Because on this stage, there's absolutely no attempt to avoid offenses. And again, the word attempt is very important. It's not that we never commit offenses on the next stage, but we're at least trying to avoid them. So in this stage, there's no attempt to avoid offenses. And the root offense that makes all the other offenses difficult is inattentiveness. So trying to be attentive while you chant your japa helps you to make progress. If you're not trying to chant attentively, not attempting to, then you have difficulty not only with that, but with all of the other offenses. So this is Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He says that that's the root cause of having trouble with the other offenses. Not that we shouldn't be attentive, not that we shouldn't try to avoid the other offenses, but if we try to avoid all the other offenses except the inattentiveness, then it's going to be very challenging. So trying to avoid all of them, but especially the inattentiveness. So there's 3 types of pramada, or inattentive chanting. One is sleep, and we're going to talk about that in the future. We're going to go into more detail about that. 2 is distraction. And 3 is lack of intensity or lack of interest or apathy. You just simply don't care. You don't care if you're attentive or not. I've heard, it's rare, but I've heard people say that they watch, someone once told me that they watch movies of Krishna while they chant so that it goes by faster. So that's, and I'm not saying that that person was an insincere devotee. It's just that that person somehow just thought your japa is something you just get over with. You just get it done. And whatever makes it go by fast, you do that. And so there's not that intensity. There's not that attempt, that intense attempt to try to be attentive. Okay, so this type of chanting, Bhaktivinoda Thakur compares it to simply letters of the alphabet. And why is that? Because the level of revelation is that the holy name remains hidden. So Krishna never reveals himself in that kind of chanting. It doesn't do anything. And so, we hear stories, especially Prabhupada says that even if someone chants in jest, there's verses about that. Prabhupada explains it. Even if someone chants in jest, there's some benefit from it, right? But once you know what you're supposed to do, and once you're making an attempt to approach Krishna, then it matters if you're trying to avoid offenses or not, because now you know what they are. Somebody, just a person on the street who's never heard of the Hare Krishnas before or has heard of them, but they heard bad things about them and they hear the mantra and they kind of jokingly say it, at least they're still uttering the words. And oftentimes what I've seen on Harinam is that even if people jokingly sing it, they actually enjoy it. We have done in Boston, we did Harinams on Halloween in Salem, which is the hub of Halloween nights. Everybody goes out there to party. They look pretty bored by the time we get there. And when we get there, they would always go crazy. They would chant and dance with us, and they would even follow us. In fact, one time when we first got there, we were walking across the street from the train station, and this kid came out in his whole vampire costume, with the cape and everything. And he said, "Oh, I was waiting for you guys. I was looking for you." And he was so happy that we were there. So we could see sometimes they may joke around or something, but they may actually really like it. Okay, so we have to attempt to be attentive. Otherwise, the holy name remains hidden, and then what's the use, right? So there's a verse in the Chaitanya Charitamrita about this. Adi Lila, chapter 8, text 16. We used to recite this in Boston before we chanted our rounds. If one is infested with the 10 offenses in the chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, despite his endeavor to chant the holy name for many births, he will not get the love of Godhead. That is the ultimate goal of this chanting. So it's right there. We can't chant our rounds without any attempt to be attentive and expect to make progress. And so somebody had asked me one time, not too long ago, some months ago, how long did it take you to get a taste for chanting? And so in his mind, it was you just keep doing it, plugging away until like one day you get a taste. It's just a matter of time. But it's actually a matter of effort. You can get a taste immediately if you make the effort. And you can chant for lifetimes without making an effort and not get anywhere and not get any taste at all. So it's really important to know these things when we're chanting our japa. Okay, so this type of chanting keeps you stuck at the stage of bhajana kriya. So we know the stages from shraddha to prema. There's shraddha, right? There's first faith. You have a little bit of faith that there might be something to this process. You get some sadhu sangha, association with devotees, and you start practicing devotional service, bhajana kriya. So the question is why? Why do we get stuck at bhajana kriya if we're not chanting, if we're chanting on the offensive stage? So we have a hint of this in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, text 12. Arjuna said, "You are the supreme personality of Godhead, the ultimate abode, the purest, the absolute truth. You are the eternal, transcendental, original person, the unborn, the greatest." So when he says that he's the purest, the Sanskrit is pavitram padam, the purest, or the supreme purifier. If you are supremely pure, then you supremely purify. Right? So again, think about this. The level of revelation at the offensive stage of chanting is that the holy name remains hidden. Now, Krishna is non-different from his name. And so if Krishna is the purest, that means connection with him purifies, supremely purifies, right? So if the holy name remains hidden and Krishna is non-different from his holy name, how will you get purified? And purification is anartha-nivritti, right? So we have the second stage of chanting, which is namabhasa. This is the almost pure chanting stage. This is the purifying stage. The level of revelation at this stage is reflection. Krishna begins to reveal himself. So if he's Pavitram Padam, the purest and the supreme purifier, then the revelation, him revealing himself, means that you are actually connecting with him. And to connect with Krishna means to be purified again. And so this is the stage after Bhajana Kriya, is Anartana Vritti. So we're going to talk about this Namabhasa and Anartana Vritti. So Anartana Vritti again means purifying your unwanted habits, purifying your anartas, your those habits that have no value, anarta. Okay, so this is the almost pure chanting, the purifying stage. So on this stage, there's an attempt to avoid offenses. And again, that word attempt is very important, because this is not the stage where you 100% avoid offenses. This is the stage where you attempt to avoid offenses. And Prabhupada calls this the almost pure stage, almost pure chanting. So just making that attempt. Okay, so first of all, humility is required, right? Again, that durdaiva, we recognize our misfortune due to offenses. So to go to the stage of namabhasa, which is basically the springboard for the pure stage, we need to first have the humility to recognize that there's some issue. We don't have taste, and it's because of our offenses. And then knowing that, we should strive diligently with a sense of urgency to become free from offenses. So now we're really being proactive. We're really making an attempt to avoid offenses. And then we can, again, we talked about this before, we can go straight to this stage and begin Anartana Vritti, because we are connecting with Krishna, as we spoke about previously. So this is how we get unstuck from Bhajana Kriya. If we stay on the offensive stage of chanting, we stay at the stage of Bhajana Kriya. Bhajana Kriya is only 3 steps in a 9-step process. So if we want to get to prema and fully reconnect with Krishna and have full revelation of Krishna, full union, we need to go past Anartana Vritti. We need to go through that and past that. Because after Anartana Vritti is Nishtha. And Nishtha means to be fixed. And it's very difficult to fall down from that fixed stage. So we want to get there. That's where we want to get to. We don't want to just hover around in Bhajana Kriya for the rest of our life and not make any progress and then wonder what happened. Okay, so this is what the word namabhasa means, is like a reflection of the name. Nama is the name and abhasa is reflection. So Haridas Thakur explains that the holy name is like the sun below the horizon, but the dawning twilight is in the sky, which destroys all sinful reactions. And so that level of revelation is Krishna just starts to reveal himself, like a little bit of light coming up over the horizon in the morning. You don't see the full manifestation of the sun, but it lights everything up. And Haridas Thakur goes on to explain further that it's like being in a dark forest, right, at night. And you're in the forest, it's very fearful. There's rogues and thieves and predatory animals that you can't see. And when the when the sun starts to come up, that fear goes away. And the Brahmins come out and start doing their yagyas and things become auspicious. And so that's what he describes namabhasa as, like we're in that stage of darkness, of ignorance. And when we try to chant attentively, we come into the stage of light or enlightenment, right? Everything is lit up for us and Krishna is revealing himself slowly. And so again, we can go straight to this stage and slowly start to connect with Krishna. And the more effort we put into attempting to avoid offenses, the more reciprocation we'll get, and the more Krishna will reveal himself. Okay, and then Shuddha Nam is the stage of pure chanting. And so on this stage, one becomes spontaneously attracted to Krishna. One attains ecstasy and spontaneous devotional service. And the level of revelation is that Krishna is completely revealed. There's direct darshan. It's like the sun at high noon. You see the full manifestation of the sun. There's no clouds in the way. Everything is there. Everything is lit up. It's like full enlightenment, full connection with Krishna. This is the stage of purity. And then this is, again, going from Shraddha to Prema. Now you've reached that stage of Prema. This is Shuddhanam. So I had talked before about how it's important to take note. I want to go back to this. It's important to take note that at this stage, the mind by default wanders to Krishna. And so in this stage, it's actually difficult to think of anything else other than Krishna. And at the stage of Namabhasa, it's difficult to think of Krishna rather than anything else, right? So Shuddhanama, I can only think of Krishna by default. Namabhasa, I think of everything else by default. And that's why at this stage there's an attempt to chant attentively, because by default the mind does not want to be attentive. The mind does not want to focus on Krishna. It wants to focus on every other thing under the sun. So it wants to focus on that thing that person said to you the other day that wasn't very nice, that you could have said something better in response to them. It wants to focus on the bills you have to pay. It wants to focus on the service you have to do. It wants to focus on how you've got to, you didn't clean the house yesterday and you have guests coming. It wants to focus on, every other thing under the sun. And so what you want to do is, when your mind by default wanders towards those things, you just bring it back. And all you have to do is hear the Maha Mantra word by word, Hare Krishna, and just focus on each word of the entire mantra. And doing that, and then every time your mind wanders away, which it will do, and you recognize it and bring it back, that's almost pure chanting. Sometimes people get despondent because they chant and they're like, oh, my rounds were terrible today because my mind wandered. Your mind's going to wander every day. That's not what makes japa terrible. What makes japa terrible is when you don't care. So if your mind wanders away and you do nothing about it, that's bad japa. If your mind wanders, which actually I shouldn't even say if, when your mind wanders on this stage and you care once you discover it, because sometimes it takes a while to discover, right? You start to chant and you're all gung-ho and you're going to really do this right and you're going to be attentive, and you get about 5 mantras in and already your mind is somewhere else. And you may not even notice it for a couple of minutes. And then you may think, oh my God, what's going on? My mind is way over here. How did it even get there? Don't lament, don't meditate on that instead of on your japa. Just forget it. Your mind wandered. You noticed it. Bring it back. Listen again. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. And just chant again. And eventually your mind will wander and you bring it back again. And it'll wander again and you bring it back again. So that process of bringing it back and just hearing the mantra, that's almost pure chanting. That's going to bring you through anartha nivritti. Krishna will start to reveal himself. The pages of the Bhagavatam, when you read, or any of Prabhupada's books that you read, will come more alive, because again, Krishna can reveal himself in so many different ways, right? His name is non-different. If you're reading, his pastimes are non-different. If you're reading about them, they come more to life when you've attempted to connect with Krishna in this very personal way. And that's the thing about japa. When you chant japa, it's just you and Krishna. There's no name, fame, and glory, right? It's not, there's always the risk with kirtan of becoming famous. There's always the risk of kirtan that you may start to lean more towards, I love this melody, rather than I love connecting with Krishna, right? That possibility is there. And it may not always be the case. In fact, I'm sure many times it's not. But when it is, when that risk factor is there, we have to be a little more careful. With japa, and this is the difficulty with japa, There's not a melody, there's no audience, there's no instruments to play. It's very different. And so that can make it more challenging, but when you are making that attempt, when you are making that effort, you will absolutely get a taste beyond belief for your chanting. So try it, do the experiment. Just even if it's one round, just, set aside that time and just try with each mantra. And you don't want to redo mantras that you were inattentive. Just keep moving forward. That's the practice. The prescription for inattentive chanting is to try to bring the mind back whenever it wanders, moving forward. So if you chant half your round and it wasn't attentive, somehow your mind wandered off, you couldn't control it, keep going. Just keep moving forward. Once you realize the mind is wandering, just keep moving forward. Next mantra. Every mantra is an opportunity to improve your attentiveness, to attempt to improve your attentiveness. So if the previous mantra wasn't great, try it again on the next one. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Just keep trying. Keep trying to pay attention to each word of the mantra, each name of the mantra. And you will slowly and steadily make progress through anartha nivritti. Your conditionings will start to become purified. The mirror of the heart will become cleansed, as Lord Chaitanya explains. And you won't be stuck at bhajana kriya. You'll go through anartha nivritti and you will become fixed. And from that stage of being fixed, from nishtha, you will continue to make progress towards prema. So this is important. Expect your mind to wander. Don't beat yourself up when it does. It will. That's what it does. That's the default mode. When you get to Shuddhanam, the default mode is that the mind always wanders towards Krishna and it's hard to pay attention to anything else. But we have to be honest about where we're at and just act accordingly. Okay, so summary of what we talked about today. 1, japa is the foundation of our spiritual life. It needs to be strong enough to support our practice. It should be strong enough, this foundation, to support our reading, our service, our relationships with Vaishnavas, and our outreach, and so on. And then Lord Chaitanya taught by personal example how to identify and correct the problem. And then there are 3 stages of chanting, and you can skip namaparad, or the offensive stage, and get unstuck from bhajana kriya by going straight to the namabhasa stage, which is the stage where you are always trying to bring your mind back every time it wanders while you're chanting. Okay, so that's the summary of that. And next session, the next japa session, part 2, we're going to talk about time management and the role of sleep in chanting. So thank you all for joining me for this japa session, and look forward to having you all for the next session. Please let me know in the comments if you have anything you want to share, any realizations, any questions, or you can email me. I'll be putting my email address, if you want to have a conversation that way, I'll be putting my email address in the description. So Hare Krishna, and have a nice Krishna conscious rest of your day.
Hare Krishna.